Our brother Jonah Daniels has kindly agreed to exhort us, and as a basis for that exhortation, he has asked that we take a reading from Haggai chapter 1, and our brother Lockie will do that for us. Thanks. I now invite your keen and undivided attention as our brother Jonah presents to us his exhortation from the words we've read in Haggai 1. Thanks, Jonah.
Morning, everyone. Nice to be with you all again. So if you follow Robert Roberts' reading plan, you'll know that Haggai 1 is one of the daily readings this morning. And to be honest, I haven't really paid much attention to Haggai through the years. It's probably one of the chapters we may have covered in a study week or a Hebron years ago, or maybe flicked through as a family years ago. But it's kind of in that area of the Bible that doesn't get ventured into very often, at least for me. Having said that, I have this year tried to spend a bit more time looking at the Old Testament, and just out of interest in it, it is really cool when you start to follow the journey and the story of Israel. So yeah, Haggai is 2 chapters. We're just going to focus on chapter 1, and it's only 14 or so verses, and reading through it initially, I was actually quite surprised at the things that stood out that I thought were beneficial and thought that would be appropriate for our exhortation and remembrance. And if you know nothing about Haggai, then I probably know maybe a fingernail more than you. So, and I also haven't read chapter 2. I guess I just wanted to see what we could derive out of chapter 1, just focusing just on that this morning and not do a whole big thing on the whole story. So we're just going to stay in chapter 1 this morning. So what is Haggai 1 all about? I guess it's a story about primarily the direction from God through Haggai to the Israelites to realign their focus on rebuilding God's house. That's really the crux. But it's a lot of things as well. It's you could say it's on priorities, it's on houses, it's building, rebuilding, covenant rebellion. It's a story of how our choices matter, obedience, reviewing our ways, and God being with us. But as with a lot of things, building a meaningful picture and extracting an exhortation comes from, I guess, painting a picture of where Israel's at and understanding the context that leads us to Haggai 1. Where were they at? Where have they come from? Where are we even in the story of Israel? Where are we in the Old Testament? Perhaps even a refresher on what is the importance of the God's building this temple. So we're dropped into Haggai 1 with immediate clues through our reading of where we're at. Obviously, we're in Israel. That's the first thing. And the focus is rebuilding God's house, the temple. And there's a people it mentions in verse 14. A key thing here, the whole remnant of the people are there. So it's a remnant, not everyone, of God's people are in the city of Jerusalem being directed by God through Haggai to rebuild God's house. And we're definitely creeping out of what would have been a very hard time in Israel's history. These folk in Haggai 1 are off the back of years of exile in Babylon, a very uncertain time, being exiled. They're in unfamiliar territory, living in a foreign land. So they're now back. They're a remnant, and they're rebuilding what has been destroyed. And I got a passage here from Psalm 137 that really paints a picture of what it would have been like in Babylon. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the populars we hung our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you. If I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. So I have a bit of a timeline here. I don't really want to go through the dates, but just a high-level picture of where we've come from. So we all know that the temple in Jerusalem was originally built by Solomon. After that, a period of time goes by and the kingdom's divided into two separate kingdoms, north and the south. The Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom of Israel. The Babylonians, a bit of time passes and the Babylonians conquer the southern kingdom of Judah, and that's where the temple is destroyed. And many of the people of Judah are also taken into exile in Babylon. And then eventually the Persians come around, they conquer the Babylonians, and they allow the people of Judah to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. So that's where we're at. The prophet Haggai delivers a message from the Lord calling on the people of Israel to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And we eventually see at the end of the story that the people follow through with that. They follow in obedience the Lord's command to rebuild the temple. So that's where we're at. Haggai is speaking to a remnant of Israelites that are back in the land after years of exile. And they've been here approximately 18 years. They've been busy rebuilding, but we can also appreciate the space that they've just come out of. And one thing I thought would be important to know, just for context, is that these events that are happening to Israel, like them being in exile, and even what's happening as we read in Haggai 1, they're not random kind of events that are just happening to Israel out of the blue. Sometimes things happen at random in our lives. We react to it, whether it's bad news or positive news. Maybe someone's died, something's happening in the news, wars. Perhaps we got a promotion out of the blue or some positive news about a family member. These are situations that God may or may not be involved in. Of course, he's involved in our lives. But time and chance happen to us all. But usually we don't really receive direct communication like through a prophet or from God directly speaking to us that way, exactly what will happen or won't happen in our lives. But this is actually not the case in this situation. God, in this case, actually does provide that direct communication to Israel. The Babylonian exile, and now in Haggai 1 with their unfruitful labor, it almost appears that Israel's prophets through like the entire Israel history has constantly been warning Israel about destruction and the results of their disobedience if they go down that path and break the covenant relationship that they've made with God. So this isn't random what we're reading here this morning. It's also not random that they are in exile. I guess the pickle that they found themselves in Babylon is according to the contract, as it were. And I just want to read a bit of a passage from Deuteronomy 28, which is the covenant relationship between Israel and God. And this is kind of what God outlines will be the result of their disobedience. So it's not a super positive thing, but it's part of the relationship. So starting verse 22, the Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. The sky over your head will be bronze, the ground beneath you iron. The Lord will turn the rain of your country into dust and powder. It will come down from the skies until you're destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in seven. And you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms on earth. Your carcasses will be food for all the birds and the wild animals, and there will be no one to frighten them away. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt and with tumors, festering sores, and the itch from which you cannot be cured. The Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, and confusion of mind. At midday, you'll grope about like a blind person in the dark. You'll be unsuccessful in everything you do. Day after day, you'll be oppressed and robbed with no one to rescue you. I've got more verses here, but I think we all get the point. So it really sounds a lot like where Israel have come from in Babylon and where they're kind of at through this chapter. And what we're seeing here really is Haggai talking to the people of Israel, outlining about how things aren't playing out for Israel as they're expecting. They're doing all this building, they're growing, they're creating, but they're lacking. Haggai, through God, points out to the people that they are lacking in their hard work, and it's going unsuccessful for them, and they're not reaping much. And I guess the advice he's providing is, as we saw in our reading, give careful thought to their ways. Verse 6 says, you've planted much, harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages only to put them in the purse with holes in it. Verse 9, you expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Verse 10, therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock, and on all the labor of your hands. So the crux of this message really is why? Why is this happening? And have a verse. The crux of the message is because of my house, God says, because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. That's the crux here. So you've been building all your own houses, and it says at the start, these people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. So the message here from Haggai is to reflect on their ways. He says, give careful thought to your ways. You're not reaping from your current labor because my house is laying in ruins, my temple. And I guess another way you can take it is your priorities are out of whack. They're not in order. And the temple was such an important part of Israel's journey and their history. The temple was built using the finest materials, cedar wood from Lebanon, gold, and precious stones. It was designed to be a fitting place for the worship of God, and it was decorated with intricate carvings and beautiful artwork. But most importantly, the temple was the central place of worship for the Israelites, and it was where they came and offered sacrifices and prayers to God. The priests performed their duties in the temple. It was where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And the temple was a symbol of God's presence among his people, and it was considered a holy and sacred place. And the Bible describes how the glory of God filled the temple, and it was a place where people could go and experience the presence of God. So that's that verse again, because of my house. This is the temple. It's laying in ruins. Each of you is busy with your own house. And perhaps that's what I want to draw out for ourselves and our experience as worshippers, as builders, as followers of God. 18 years had gone past since this remnant had returned to Israel. They were busy in life, and in this instance, God had intervened, as we saw, according to his covenant, which had led to the unsuccessful work of Israel. But I find it personally true in my life that when God is far away, life seems less meaningful or purposeful. The work of my hands or the things that I build, they hold less value, because really at the root of it, God provides and gives everything we do purpose and fills us with the meaning and direction that we so need. And that happens especially when we place him at the top. Last week, Jem spoke a very thoughtful prayer that I really related to. I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but he was talking about our nature and our faith. And he said something like, we do at times fail in our faith. We doubt, our faith waxes thin, or maybe we peak and trough. We're human. We stumble, and sometimes we stumble repeatedly. Paul says, "For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do." But the encouragement this morning is God reminding Israel of their covenant with him. He highlights this shift in priorities and explains to them and shines a light on, why they've been unsuccessful. It's because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. God brings back their focus in line, and we see at the end of the story the Spirit really stirring up the entirety of the people there and providing them that direction and motivation to rebuild. So whether we've forgotten God's house in our life, whether we've been busy for years and years, the same encouragement is to us also. It's to come back, to refocus and to rebuild God's house in our lives. And whatever form that is to us. A house is made up of many parts, and so is our faith. Maybe it's prayer, maybe it's reading, maybe it's looking out for our peers, maybe it's worship, perhaps our vision of the future. An important detail in this story is in verse 13. This is just off the back of 12, where we have the people obeying the voice of their Lord, of the Lord their God, and the message of the prophet Haggai, because their Lord their God sent him, and the people feared the Lord. God says in verse 13, I am with you. It says, I am with you, Israel. And this really is quite the pinnacle of contrast between what we've just read about the results of disobedience and also what they've just been experiencing in Haggai 1. It's such a contrast. This is the other side of the coin, the other side of, I guess, the contract or the covenant relationship between God and Israel. And we know all through the Bible, God completely backs Israel in everything if they follow him and keep his commandments. And this is, I guess, the light shining through the clouds, as it were, the abundance of blessings that are associated with obedience and fervor for God's ways. And I find it fascinating that a big part of how God works in and through the world is upon the obedience of his people. Think on these examples. Abraham's obedience to sacrifice Isaac is what led God into and add to his covenant with him. He says directly after that experience, God says to Abraham, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities and of their enemies. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Noah, through obedience, saved his family and God's animals. Paul's obedience to Jesus in the cloud, this led to the conversion of many, many people. So you can probably think of many that come to mind. There's heaps of examples of this. And Haggai 1 is just another example of this obedience to God leading to positive outcomes. And I think that understanding that God works in and through us via our obedience is something that can really motivate like a humility and action in us if we really dwell on that. The fact that God changes the course of history through obedience of his people, and we, as part of that experience, like Israel in Haggai, have the ability and opportunity to change outcomes for the positive through obedience to God's ways and his commandments. And we're seeing in Haggai 1 that God is still completely active in his covenant with Israel, regardless of their failures. He says, I am with you. He says, I'm with you in your obedience and efforts to rebuild my temple. So God is still active in his covenant with us as well. He's still the same God in 2022 that said those words to Israel. He's still with you. So as the story continues towards the end of the chapter, we see these lessons drawn out and resolve a positive outcome. We see the remnant of Israel, this remnant that has come back from Babylon, back to the land. They're banding together, they're stirred up by the Spirit, and they're rebuilding God's house with God completely on their side. So the message of Haggai, I guess, is a story about a message to Israel and to us about our actions mattering. Israel suffered from diverting from their relationship and agreement with God, But then Israel do well through obedience. And we, like them, can change history through through decisions and obedience to God, doing it his way and following his commandments. So we see the future is impacted by the decisions made today, and Israel made the decision to obey the voice of God. And it's also about putting God first and rebuilding his house. 18 years Israel was busy in the land, and God brings back their focus back to rebuilding his house. And we're the exact same 2,000 plus years later, we're all so busy as well. And the message to us is to bring our focus back and rebuild whatever part of that house is in our lives, rebuilding God's house in our lives. And we have more meaning and more purpose and direction when we put God's house first. Our paths are made straight. Our life is more enjoyable. Proverbs 19 says, obedience to the Lord brings wealth, honor, and life. Finally, this story is also a message of, I am with you. God backs Israel entirely. He won't break his covenant. So we do see the sufferings and the failures due to their disobedience, but he backs them all the more in their obedience. He's on their side, and he wants success for them. And it's the same for us. God is with us in our weaknesses and failings, and is always there to stir up our spirit when we come back to him in obedience.